3 views and you're already making announcements. Getting cocky. You're getting cocky. Hello and welcome to the announcement video for the African Fantasy and Science Fiction Readathon. For those who don't know, a readathon is a reading marathon. It's like a portmanteau of those two words. And basically it's when you dedicate a certain amount of time to meeting certain reading goals. For this readathon, we're focusing on African fantasy and sci-fi. So how it goes is that the challenge is simply within the month of July to read any African fantasy and or science fiction novel, comic, graphic novel, short story, poem. And what I've done is I've compiled a Google document that you'll find in the description box, where you can click on it. You'll find some further instructions where you can follow us online on Twitter and Instagram. And there's a list of book recommendations in that genre. This readathon is not meant to confine you to just reading African fantasy and sci-fi in July. If you want to take part, you can take part in other readathons as well. You can just do your normal reading. You can read one book and be done. You can read one comic or 2 comics and be done. You can spend the whole month reading in this genre. That's fine, whichever way you want to go about it. But the point is, if you're taking part, is just to consume any fiction literature within this genre. As I said, we're on social media, so if you're taking part, let us know by us. There's no us. Us is me and the 2 ghosts behind me, I guess. Let us know that you're taking part by using the hashtag afrofantasylit and tagging us if you're on Twitter and Instagram. You can also DM us if you want to flag anything, flag any broken links within the Google document, or if you have a question to something I'm not going to answer in this video or that is not answered within the Google document. The reason that I initially wanted to do this was simply because I feel like on the whole, African literature is definitely not elevated that much around the world, but even more so fringe genres like fantasy and science fiction. There's lots of stories. This is not a recent thing. This has always been there. We've always had African fantasy and sci-fi. African mysticism and African spirituality have existed from the beginning of time. This readathon is for looking for more diverse reads. Right about now, there's lots of guys spreading Black authors, African American authors, African authors that can be read by people who usually don't read those authors. A lot of the time I've been seeing Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi in terms of this genre, and several other authors. But I just want people to know that there's a much broader, like that's the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more. Most of the time what is being shown is fantasy, and people need to also know that science fiction is there. So this is also for people who maybe you're trying to get into science fiction and you're looking for diverse reads. This is for you. The only definition I've given to this readathon of the books that I've chosen is that they need to be taking place within the African continent. So that's why in the description you'll find in the Google document I've mentioned African futurism instead of Afrofuturism, and I've linked a blog post by Nnedi Okorafor, who is a very famous science fiction Black American author, Nigerian author, who wrote about the distinction between African futurism and Afrofuturism, which I won't get into here. But lightly speaking, Afrofuturism is centered around a Western narrative about Black people in the Western world, and African futurism is centered about Black people in Africa, like the context is Africa. And so you can read more about it in the blog post. A few questions I want to answer before they're asked. The first is that I know science fiction and fantasy are 2 different genres. Often they're lumped together as speculative fiction, but I know there's people who will have that disparity. I am well aware, and I still decided to just lump them together. So if there's any interest in this next year, I will add in, or even as the year goes, I will add in more genres, more subgenres into the books so that you know more of what you're clicking. Another thing is that I decided to do my only categorization as African authors and African diasporan authors. because I know there's some people who would want to know that. However, that was really hard to do. Even defining if a certain author is African or African diasporan was a whole thing. And so if you run into anything into anyone in the document that of an author you know and you feel like they've been lumped into the wrong category, please let me know. As I said, DM afrofantasylit on Twitter or Instagram. Also, this list is definitely incomplete. This is not meant to be a total list of all the books or stories that exist in this genre. Not at all. Please know I keep adding things. As I said, depending on the interest in this, I'll see if I'll keep adding for next year's edition or how we go about it. I'll also see if there's anyone interested in helping out to voluntarily to just help compile the list. There's also a form within the Google Doc that you can fill in if you're seeing a book or a story that you know that's not on the list and you want it to be on the list. It's about 5 questions and you can fill it in, and I will look at my very weird criteria, my very undefined criteria for adding books to the list, and I'll add it if it counts. So for those who are unable to buy books, there's a lot of free stories on there. There's lots of short stories, and I've found lots that are free. So if you want to take part and you're unable to buy books, there's lots of free stories, free comics, free poems. In all the mediums you'll find there's a couple of free stories. There's some short stories that are written, and there's also a podcast version. So those ones are defined with audio story. Just do Control F and find the audio stories if you want, or Control F and find the poems. Basically just use find and replace function within Google Docs. However, if you can buy books, please buy ebooks, especially in this time where it may be hard to get physical copies of things. Just buy the ebooks if you're able to, in order to support authors. You may have seen the hashtag publishing paid me on Twitter, and where authors are revealing what they earn by by publishing houses, and there's a clear disparity between Black and white authors. So if you can, just buy these books and support these authors. And especially for the people who are very well versed in this genre, please contribute. Tell us the books that we need to read, the really good ones. You can also check out the African Speculative Fiction Society that have the NOMO awards, that are basically awards for this genre. So if you're also looking for books that have been nominated for an award or have won awards in this genre, I'll link the awards page so that you can check it out as well. Also, we have a playlist. I really was doing the most. We have a playlist for this readathon which has like African fantasy inspired music. Don't ask me what that means. Don't ask me how I chose. I had a friend helping out. Go check it out and let me know if it really does make you feel like you're living in an African fantasy and science fiction world. Last but not least, I worked with an artist called Kelvin Shani. I'll link his Twitter and Instagram below. He did amazing artwork. It's the one that's on our display picture on Instagram and our display picture and Twitter banner on Twitter. Please go check him out. Please support him, follow, commission him for stuff. It was a very smooth process working with him. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to seeing whether it's just gonna be me on this readathon. Honestly, if it's just even one other person taking part, or one other person discovering a book or a story that they had not discovered before, or an author that they had not discovered before, I will be pleased. I didn't do this in February for Black History Month because Black people exist the other 11 months, so also we really need it in this time. I think the world is at a place where like a lot is happening, so it needed to happen now, not in February. Depending on how things go, I'll consider how to move forward with it, because I definitely want to do this annually and move on with it and see how it just progresses. Let us do this as a love letter to the authors in this genre, because they really deserve it.